All right. Good to see everybody this morning. All right, so I missed y'all last week. I don't know if y'all missed me, okay? But I missed y'all, and it was good to get a break. But honestly, I really don't like taking a break. So we went to church at the church that I grew up in, actually, and the whole time I was just thinking, I was like, man, I wish I was back at CrossLife. I wish I was preaching this morning. It stinks just sitting here and having to listen to somebody else preach, you know. And I know how y'all feel, all right? So, just kidding. But we're starting a new series today, and it's called Those People. And we all have those people in our life that we have to deal with, people that are hard to get along with, people that are hard to love. And so we're going to spend basically the month of June just kind of talking about people that are like that. Okay, and so you can see either side you want to look at here. You got the hypocrite, the manipulator, the needy, and the critic. And so, you know, I heard this past week somebody said, you know, this earth, this place that we live would be really awesome if it wasn't for annoying people. All right, anybody agree with that, right? If it just wasn't for annoying people, life would be really, really cool, you know. But there's always annoying people around us all the time, right? Unfortunately, they do exist. Annoying people do exist, okay? And we need to not only learn to live with people that are annoying, but we need to also learn to love people that are annoying and that are hard to love, okay? And so today, we're going to talk about people that are overly critical, okay? People that are overly critical. Jason's shirt, you know, your shirt, you came in right at the right moment, all right? I love haters, all right? I love haters. People that are critical, right? So we use you as a sermon illustration. You didn't know that today, did you? I think the Lord led you to put that shirt on this morning. It's like, you're trying to pick which one. It's like, no, it's going to be the I love haters shirt. That's the shirt Jason was supposed to wear this morning. All right. But we're talking about loving those overly critical people. You know that person that's just never happy with anything. Okay, they can find something negative to say no matter what you do. You could feel like you just did exactly what you needed to be done, like you're just perfect, everything's going well. You're just like, man, this person's going to love what I'm doing. There's no way they can find anything negative to say about this. And then sure enough, they come in and they just find something negative to say. Maybe it's a coworker, maybe it's a boss, maybe it's, you know, a spouse. Maybe you live with the overly critical person. But we all have somebody like that in our lives, okay? There may be some of us that are that person, all right? And so I may be talking to you today. But I want to look at how we respond to the overly critical person, okay? And some of us, you know, that overly critical person kind of looks like that, right? They look like that in our lives. It's just like they're just always just right there, that megaphone just saying, you're worthless, you can't do good enough, you get this wrong, you got that wrong, you got this wrong, and it's just, you just look like that lady right there, just, oh my gosh, I wish this person would just shut up, right? And so we need to learn how we're going to deal with that, okay? The correct response, okay, the key idea for everything is the correct response to criticism is always wisdom, okay? No matter what the criticism is, no matter what they say, no matter what they do, the correct response is always wisdom, okay? So that's what we're going to say. Wisdom, first of all, wisdom never ignores the value of constructive criticism. Don't ignore the value of constructive criticism. So there is a difference between being negatively critical and unjustly critical and being constructively critical. Okay? And so there's value in constructive criticism. In Proverbs chapter 15, verses 31 and 32, it says, if you listen to correction to improve your life, you will live among the wise. Those who refuse correction hate themselves, but those who accept correction gain understanding. And so we need to listen to correction. There is good correction. There is good advice that people give us. There is good criticism that people lovingly give us, and we need to be willing to listen to that. If we do, we're among the wise. If we refuse it, I love the way this translation words this. You hate yourself, all right? If you refuse to listen to good advice, to good critical advice, then you hate yourself and you refuse to gain correction, you refuse to gain understanding. I read a story this week about General Dwight D. Eisenhower, that whenever he would come up with a plan, he would first get all of his critics together, people who were always saying negative things about him and about his plans, and he would gather them together and he would present his plan to them. And he would let them pick it apart and tell him all the bad things and all the things that were wrong with it. And then he would go and he would fix it. And somebody would ask him, why do you do that? Why don't you just get a team of advisors and people that love you and that care about you, and why don't you get them together to figure out, to show them your plan? And he said, no, I want my critics. They're going to tear it apart, but I know once they tear it apart, I can go back, I can fix it, I can make it better, because they're going to show me everything that's wrong with it, how it can be defeated, and they're going to help me to make it better. And so we need to look at critics in that way as well, that sometimes it's constructive and sometimes it is helpful. So not all criticism is bad, and actually a lot of criticism will make us better. There was a family one time that left our church, okay? And they hadn't been to church in a while. I was kind of concerned, and so whenever somebody hasn't been in a while, I start praying about it. God, where have these people been? What's going on? And then I'll send an email or text message or call or whatever. Try to find some way to get a hold of them. And so I did that with this family. They hadn't been in a few weeks, and so it wasn't like them. I Facebook messaged them, and so they responded back. We decided to look for another church. Okay, and as a pastor, you never want to hear that. Because you're always like, well, it's my fault. What did we do? We stink. And it just makes you feel depressed, right? And so I was like, well, what's going on? Why did you guys leave? And because also on the other side of it is whenever somebody does leave, I always want to be like, well, you just you don't really love Jesus, and that's why you're leaving, and so you just can't handle my truthful preaching, and you're trying to get away from that, so you want to kind of go that way too sometimes. But just praying about it, I knew the wise thing to do, what is the problem? Why do they want to leave? And maybe that'll help us become better. And so at first, they didn't really give me anything. They were just like, well, we're just kind of moved in a different area. Our schedules don't match up, and we need to find a church that maybe has services that offer services at different times to match our schedule. And so, but then after, talking with them a little bit more, I kind of got more information out of them. And really what it came down to was the wife really didn't seem to like my preaching that much. And I know that's going to shock y'all. They're just like, what? No way, right? But that's really what it came down to. And so that led me, this has been a few years ago, that led me to begin evaluating my sermons and my preaching, and to just say, what, I've maybe kind of been coasting a little bit. Maybe I do need to improve, and there's some things I could get better at. And I've been doing that. I've been trying to get better, trying to improve in content, trying to improve in what I'm saying, how I'm speaking, all those things, because I know that I need to get better. Now, whether she was right or wrong, it doesn't matter. What does matter is that there's always room for improvement. And it forced me to realize that I can improve, and I need to improve, always be improving. In fact, I meet with two other pastors. We do it through Skype, but we're reading through a book on how to speak better. And we also evaluate each other's sermons. So they will listen to my sermon, and then they will give me feedback. And they're not allowed to just say, hey, great sermon, man, that was awesome. They have to give me actual feedback. This is what you did good. This is what you need to work on. This is what you absolutely need to stop doing. Okay? And it's not easy to hear. I kind of dread having to hear that, but it's good and it's needed. And then I get to do the same to them. Be like, yeah, you ripped me, I'm gonna rip you. No, just kidding. Actually, I don't like having to do that. It stinks having to watch a sermon just to try to evaluate it, not try to get the content out of it. But anyways, it's good. Constructive criticism is always beneficial. It helps us. Okay. Jesus was often critical. If you read through the life of Jesus and in the Bible as it talks about Jesus, he was critical of the way that the religious leaders were living their lives and the way that they were worshiping and the way that they were requiring things of people. And so Jesus was being very critical of them, but he did it because they were actually wrong and what he was saying was true, and it needed to be said because they needed to stop doing what they were doing. But also Jesus... many people were unjustly critical of Jesus. They were unjustly critical of his criticism. They were unjustly critical of his life and of his teachings. And so we want to talk about that this morning. I want to kind of spend more time on dealing with unjust criticism. Okay? First thing is when dealing with unjust criticism is that we need the wisdom of God. It helps us to know when to defend ourselves to the critic. Helps us to know when to defend ourselves to the critic, because there are times when we need to. When the person is being critical, they're being unjustly critical, and something needs to be said, and we need to defend our actions, defend our words, defend what we're doing, defend what they're criticizing. There's a passage in the Bible, a story in the Bible actually, that talks about this in Judges chapter 8. Speaking of the judge Gideon, it says, the men of Ephraim asked Gideon, why did you treat us this way? Why didn't you call us when you went to fight against Midian? They argued angrily with Gideon. So they're being very critical of his decision. He had led his men into a battle, and these men were not called to go to battle with them. And so they're upset with Gideon. But Gideon answers, and he says, but he answered them, I have not done as well as you. The small part you did was better than all that my people of Abiezer did. In verse 3, it says, God let you capture Oreb and Zeb, the princes of Midian. How can I compare what I did with what you did? When the men of Ephraim heard Gideon's answer, they were not as angry anymore. Now, I don't want to get into the details of what they're talking about, the battles and all of that. It doesn't matter, okay, for our context of what we're talking about today. What does matter is that they were angry at Gideon. They were criticizing his decision, his leadership, and what he had decided to do. And Gideon took time to defend himself and said, this is why I did what I did. And after he explained himself, it says they heard his answer and they were not angry with him anymore. And so there's the wisdom of God shows us and tells us and lets us know when it's time to give an explanation to those critics and to those that are criticizing our decisions, criticizing what we're doing. And if we can express that in a way that will help them to maybe not be angry and not criticize us anymore. But there's a key to expressing it, okay? We can't just express it. Like whenever somebody's criticizing you, the way we want to express our defense a lot of times is we want to come back in anger or maybe come back in ways that are not healthy. But we need to express it in the terms of like the fruit of the Spirit. Let the Spirit lead us in how we express in defending ourselves, okay? If you're not familiar with what the fruit of the Spirit is, it's in Galatians chapter 5, verses 22 and 23. But the fruit of the Spirit is this, okay? So we express when we're defending ourselves to the critic. We want to do it in a loving way. We want to do it with joy. We want to do it with peace. We want to do it with patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control, okay? And so if we can't defend ourselves in that way, then just shut up, all right? Don't defend yourself. But if you can defend yourself in that way with love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, faithfulness, goodness, gentleness, self-control, then do it. Then you can do it, okay? But also, so that's the first thing is that wisdom of God helps us to know when to defend ourselves to the critic, okay? But it also, the wisdom of God, the second thing is the wisdom of God helps us to know when to ignore invalid criticism, okay? You will be criticized, and you have been. I know you have. We all have been. We all have been criticized invalidly. We've been criticized unjustly in a way that we should not have been criticized. It wasn't right. And we, at times, need to be able to ignore that. Sometimes that can be very, very difficult to do. But it is the best thing to do. It is the wisest thing to do sometimes. Sometimes we think, well, I'm a Christian, I can never defend myself. And that's not true, okay? But sometimes we do need to ignore it. Ignore the criticism and just take it. 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 23. 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 23 says, people insulted Christ, but he did not insult them in return. Christ suffered, but he did not threaten. He let God, the one who judges rightly, take care of him. And so Jesus sets the example for us on ignoring criticism. Now, Jesus didn't always ignore it. Sometimes he defended himself. But in certain instances, Jesus did ignore it. And especially when he was on the cross. As Jesus was on his way to the cross, as he was on the cross, he was being insulted by all kinds of people. He was insulted while he was hanging on the cross by the thieves who were hanging on the cross with him. And Jesus just let it go. He ignored it. And so sometimes we have to let it go. We have to let God be the one who judges rightly. Let God be the one to handle the overly critical and the unjustly critical person. I read an illustration this past week that I thought was kind of good. There's a father, a son, and a donkey, and they were walking from village to village. And at first, the father was riding on the donkey, and the son was walking. And people saw that, and they said, man, what a mean, unjust father to allow his son to walk while he rides on the donkey. And so they were getting criticized for that. And so they decided, all right, let's switch places. And so the father got down, and he began to walk, and the son rode on the donkey. And people saw that, and they said, man, what a spoiled son. The father just lets him ride on that donkey, and he walks. He's the father, the son's young. He should be walking. So they said, man, this kind of stinks. We're getting criticized for this too. So they both got on the donkey. And people saw that, and they began to criticize. What a poor donkey. That poor donkey has to take the weight of both the father and the son. Poor donkey. And so they were just like, well, we can't win. All right, so they both got off. And they both walked and let the donkey walk, not carrying either one of them. And people saw that, and they're like, man, these guys are idiots. They've got this perfectly good donkey, and they're not one of them's riding it. The father and son just looked at each other and just shrugged their shoulders, and next thing you know, you have the son walking and the father's carrying the donkey on his shoulders, And that's, it's kind of a silly illustration, but it's true of how criticism works. So you will always find somebody that will criticize you on everything, no matter what you do. No matter what you do, people are going to criticize you. And so we don't have the time. I don't anyway. I don't know about you, but I don't have the time or the energy to answer every single person who's going to criticize you. To try to defend yourselves all the time to those who are going to be critical. And so there's times that we have to just ignore it. We have to just let it go. Some people will criticize you on the way you parent your children. They're going to say, "Oh, you're too hard on your children." And then if you soften up on them, you have other people who are going to criticize you. "Oh, you're spoiling your kids," And so you can't win for losing. Sometimes it maybe if you at work, you're an employee, you work real hard and you try to do the right thing, and you may have some other employees who are like, "Oh man, what a kiss up," you're just trying to please the boss, and then you'll have if you slack off, then you have the boss, "Oh man, you're a slacker," you're not doing the work you're supposed to do. You're always going to be criticized no matter what you do. There's a great quote that I heard this week. It said, "Don't let compliments get to your head. Don't let criticism get to your heart." Don't let compliments get to your head, make you get too prideful and too arrogant. Don't let criticism get to your heart. And that's hard to do. That criticism, people criticize us and we want to ignore it, but it gets to our heart and begins to just bring us down. And even if I ignore it and I say, I'm not going to say anything, it still brings us down and discourages us and makes it difficult to go on. And criticism, it goes to our heart. It goes to our heart when we elevate the opinions of people above God. When we elevate people's opinions above God and what people say about us, what people think about us, when that matters more to us than what God thinks about us and what God's saying about us, then that criticism is going to go to our heart, it's going to affect us, and it's going to bring us down. And so not only do we need to ignore the criticism, but we need to not become obsessed with it. We need to not let it bother us, and we need to care more about what God thinks about us than what people think about us. When we become obsessed with what people think, it leads us to forgetting about what God thinks about us. And really, that's what matters most. What does God think about me? What is God's opinion of me? Is God happy with the way I'm living my life? Is He happy with the decisions that I'm making? Is He happy with what I'm saying, with what I'm doing? And if God is happy with this and God is okay with this, that's all that matters. Forget what people think, okay? Forget the haters, right, Jason? Just forget the haters. Or we love them. We can love the haters, all right. And so we need to ignore what people are saying. Don't let it bring us down, but let us rise above the criticism. Okay? Rise above the critic. Rise above the criticism. And the way that we rise above the criticism and rise above those critics and not let it bring us down is by getting closer to God. The closer you get to God, the criticism matters less. All right, the third thing is that the wisdom of God helps us to overcome our own critical nature. So we've been spending the last 2 points kind of talking about other people's overly critical nature, but every one of us also struggle with being overly critical ourselves. Some of us struggle with it more than others. No finger pointing, all right? Because then you are that person again, all right? But we all struggle with that, okay? And so we need to be able to overcome that. And the wisdom of God helps us to respond correctly to our own critical nature and be able to overcome it. Jesus teaches about this in Matthew chapter 7, verses 1 and 2. He says, "Don't judge others, or you will be judged. You will be judged in the same way that you judge others. And the amount you give to others will be given to you." And so Jesus, very rightly saying, the way that you judge other people is how you are going to be judged. And so if you are being overly critical, you're judging people about whatever it may be, you're probably going to experience that yourself. Whenever I was younger, and I don't know why I did this, okay? Like in my teenage years, all right? Just starting to learn how to drive, had my own car, you know? And I would see people that had, like, their car, like, broke down or something like that. And I would think, man, those people, they must not treat their car right. They must do something. And I would just have this critical mindset and this judgmental attitude towards people that their cars were broke down, because I was driving in my car and it wasn't broke down. It was working just fine, you know. And just this arrogant, you know, teenager that somebody should have punched in the face, you know. But here I was just being critical of them, being judgmental. And then before long, like maybe just a few weeks later, my car would break down. I'd be like, why? Why is this happening? You know, but it was the exact same thing that I was judging somebody else about would happen to me. And you know, I've seen that play out in my life. Because sometimes I used to read this verse and I would think, okay, if I judge others, when they face the judgment seat of God, like at the end of time, God's going to judge me for all my judgmental thoughts. But I think God judges us and forces us to experience our critical, judgmental attitudes that we judge others with that is wrong. We get to experience that now, okay? And I've seen that play out in my life in many different ways where I've been judgmental of somebody for something. I've been overly critical, and then I end up experiencing that same thing. And then feeling like I need to really apologize for my critical attitude that I had towards those people. And so Jesus, right after this teaching, he talks about how, he says, talking about these overly critical, judgmental people, he says, you know what? He says, you notice the little speck of dust in somebody else's eye, but you don't notice the large plank, the large 2x4 sticking out of your eye. And a lot of times that's the way it is that we see the faults of others and we ignore the faults of ourselves. Another illustration I read this week, there's a man and his wife had pulled up to a gas station. And it was one of those where they had an attendant come out and wash the windows. And so the man was sitting there, and the attendant came out to clean the window. He cleaned it up, got it all done. And the attendant said, "All right, sir, it's all ready to go." And the man just looked at the attendant like, "Are you nuts? This window is filthy. You need to clean it again." He was kind of irritated with the kid, And so the attendant again, he was like, "All right, sorry, sir." So he paid a little bit more attention to it, and he washed it again, and really tried to get it nice and clean. He didn't, wanted to make this customer happy. And he gets it nice and clean and says, "All right, sir, I got it ready." And the driver's like, "Are you serious? You are like the worst window washer in the world. This thing is filthy. You've done it 2 times, and it's still not done right. Do it again, and do it right this time." So the attendant's like freaking out. And so he's like, "All right." So he gets trying to clean it. Just details it, just like looking all over the place, trying to find any little spot he can. He cleans it just spectacularly. And the driver is just irate. He's like, "Are you kidding me? 3 times you've tried to clean this thing and you can't get it right. You are worthless. I'm going to go talk to your boss right now and you're never going to work here again." The guy's wife reaches over and grabs his glasses and cleans them off. And then puts them back on, and he realizes how clean the windshield actually is. And it was just his glasses that were dirty. And, it's just an illustration, but it shows how we are a lot of times. When we're overly critical of people, it really shows how filthy our hearts are. And then it may not be that they have all these faults, but it may be that we have all these faults in us. And we become overly critical of others because our hearts are wrong. And our hearts are filthy. And our hearts aren't where they should be. And our pride gets a hold of us. And our pride starts to look at other people. And our pride says, "I'm always right. They're always wrong." And we begin to just point out the faults of others. And so we need wisdom to see the condition of our heart. We need wisdom to see when we're being overly critical. And we need wisdom to not only see it, but we need wisdom to change it. And so, there's often times when I'm like this with my family, where I'm just going to be overly critical of my wife and my daughters and my son. And I realize, sometimes I realize, I'm the one that's with the problem. If everybody else is annoying, everybody else has problems, maybe I'm the one with the problem. And so, but a lot of times we feel like we have to criticize. We have to inspire the change in people. We've got to be overly critical of them, and we got to tear them down and just point out all their faults so that they'll change and they'll be better. But we don't really inspire change by being overly critical. We inspire change by loving people up, not tearing them down. That doesn't mean that when we're loving them up, that we don't have the responsibility to criticize them, to have constructive criticism. We do. As a parent, I have a responsibility to my children not to just let them live their lives however they want and do whatever they want to do and just say, "Oh, I'm just loving them up." No. But I love them up by helping them overcome their faults, helping them overcome those things. But if I'm constantly just nitpicking every little thing and being overly critical, they're not going to listen. They're just going to do the right thing for the time, and then they're going to rebel. And it's not only true with our children, it's also true with everybody in our lives. That if we're overly critical and we're just constantly tearing them down, they'll do the right thing around us, but it's not going to really change them. If we want to inspire change, we have to love them up. And so how do we know whether what we're saying is good to say? Is it really constructive criticism? I have 3 questions that we should ask ourselves. Ask ourselves these questions before criticizing. First of all, is it true? And there's times when what you're saying is true, but it's not helpful. So that's the second question. Is it helpful? All right. And then the third thing is it wise? So if I'm criticizing somebody, I got something that I need to say, I need to point out something in their life. Is it true? Because sometimes it's not true. Sometimes if you want to be critical about something, you want to say it's this, this, and this. And if you allow them to defend themselves, to give you an explanation of why they're doing what they're doing, then your criticism is not true. Maybe sometimes it's not even true according to the standards of God's Word. And then, is it helpful? It may be true, but just because it's true doesn't mean you got to say it to them. Okay? Right? Okay? It may be true that what they wore today is really ugly. Okay? But it may not be helpful to tell them. All right? And sometimes it's true. Sometimes it would be helpful. And we got to ask, is it wise? Is it wise? And if it is wise, how do I wisely say it to them? Just a small example of this is kind of not that big of a deal, but this past Wednesday, there was we were here at church. Somebody had something in their teeth, right? And you get some food stuck in there or whatever, right? So, all right, so I got to be critical, right? I'm like, all right, do I say something or not? All right, so I'm pointing out something bad in their life. But it was true, right? They had something in their teeth, right? It was there. Is it helpful for me to say something to them? Yes. All right. Who wants to have stuff stuck in your teeth and you're going to talk in front of other people and all that stuff? And so, yes, it's helpful. And then wise. Is it wise to say something? It depends on how you do it. If I were to make a big deal and be like, hey, everybody, check this out. So-and-so has something in their teeth. And, hey, man, you should probably go take care of that. It just defeats the purpose if I point it out and I say something in front of everybody. Is it wise in how I say it? I can make fun of them and be like, oh, you sloppy eater or whatever, and be wise in how you say it, And so I would hope that if I get something stuck in my teeth, y'all help me out, right? Y'all going to say something? Okay. So the correct response always to criticism is wisdom. It's always wisdom, okay? Wisely respond to those that are giving you constructive criticism. Don't ignore it. Take value in that. Know when to defend yourself. Know when to ignore it. And know when to be critical and not to be critical. Know when you're being unjustly critical and be wise about that. You don't want to be one of those people, okay? So don't be. Don't be the overly critical. But we still have a responsibility to love the overly critical person. And so there's going to be times when they're not being very loving towards us. But Jesus teaches us to love our enemies. Love those who persecute you. And sometimes when somebody's being critical, that's what it feels like. It feels like persecution. We've got to love them and show them kindness and all those things. And so there's times when we may defend ourselves and there's times to ignore it and just allow God to do the defending. Jesus faced criticism everywhere he turned. He was criticized by his enemies to the point that they killed him and they put him on the cross. He was criticized by his friends who said, you don't need to go and die on the cross. But Jesus knew that no matter what, didn't matter whether people were criticizing him or not, the most important thing was that he was obedient to God. And the same is true with us, is that it doesn't matter what people say about us. What ultimately matters is what is God saying? What does God think? Is God happy with our decisions? Is God happy with the way that we're living our life? And if he is, then we can go in peace. Jesus wisely did what God wanted him to do. He rose above all the critics. He died on the cross so that he could save those who were criticizing him. He could save those who have overly critical natures and overly critical things to say and overly critical spirits. And he died so that he could help us overcome our own sinful, overly critical selves. Through Jesus, we gain the wisdom of God. Through Jesus, we gain the wisdom of God so that we know how to handle criticism, so that we can handle it correctly. And it is only through Jesus that we can have that. And I don't know where you stand today, whether you have accepted Jesus and trusted in Him with your life. But if you haven't, I want to give you an opportunity to do that. I'm going to pray a prayer in just a minute that is a prayer of committing your life to Jesus, to accept Him and to be made right with God. And if you'd like to make that decision today, I invite you to pray this along with me. Everybody bow their heads and close their eyes. Let's pray. Dear Jesus, I believe that you died for me and that you rose again. I ask you to come into my life, to change me, to make me new, and to forgive me of my sins. Thank you for saving me. Thank you for loving me. Let's all pray. God, we just thank you so much for loving us, even when we're overly critical. Help us to be wise in how we handle those that are critical towards us. I pray that we wouldn't just dismiss all criticism, but we would take time to think about it and pray about it and allow you to change us according to the way we need to be. Help us to defend ourselves when we need to ignore when we need to not let criticism get us down, but to allow ourselves to grow closer to you in the midst of criticism, God, and to rise above it. God, I pray for a person right now that may be feeling like they're just overwhelmed by the critical person that they're having to deal with. I pray that you will lift them up right now, God, that you will help them to be able to overcome, to rise above it, and to trust in you. God, I pray for that person that is being overly critical, that you will help them to see the error of their way. Help them to see that they need you, God, that they need to back off. They need to handle things in a better way. God, we love you for looking out for us. We love you for caring about us. We love you for helping us to grow. We pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen.